again, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining Seven Senses 7 years celebration. It's just crazy. I can't believe it's 7 years. It went so quick. Just had a look the other day at our website that we last updated in 2014, when actually my kids were 1 and 3, and now they are nearly teenagers. It feels like it. So they are
not really.
well, but they're pretty. Hey, David made as well. He was in early from WA. And now a bit late. That's fine, mate. Good to see you. Thank you so much. The other thing before I start, I really would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yugara people as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognize that these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. So again, partnering with QUT is a great honor, and thank you so much, QUT Lab, for being part of this. Also wanted to mention that this week is NIDOC week. I think it's amazing like how many organizations got involved and how much you hear on the radio and how much we all learn about the history, the culture, and the achievements of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So I think that's fantastic. And it's cool actually that the 7 Sense celebration for us was in this week as well to really connect. So once again, super excited to have you all here to run through this. And as you know, we have been driving 7 Sense or inclusive design that goes beyond accessibility now for 7 years. So when we started, obviously, and these are still our aims, to promote, to collaborate, to educate, to advocate, and to champion. I think this event tonight is again part of this, to really start the conversation, think deeper, go beyond accessibility and go beyond your normal thinking of how do we design sensory spaces. After the little welcome and introduction, we will go straight away into the 7 speakers for the 7 minutes. So we will be pretty strict on the 7 minutes. I know all of you have family and probably want to go back, but really appreciate that you have this time. And so we will kick off with my wife, Hilke, that I know the longest, 23 years, so I'm not super old. We actually met very young, and Hilke is an occupational therapy and therapist and actually introduced me to the 7 Senses. After that, we will hear from Associate Professor Deborah, and I know Deborah now for many years as well. I'm doing some guest lecturing for her students and doing a lot of research, so she will talk a little bit about that. The third presenter is Councillor Matt Constance from Moreton Bay Regional Council, who is super passionate about inclusion and a great advocate and champion for change. The fourth presentation will be by the amazing Dr. Nick Stevens from the University of Sunshine Coast. He's an urban design and town planning program at the Center of Human Factors and Socio-Technical Systems. Pretty interesting, very exciting, and we did some amazing research together in 2014 in Palmwoods. Number 5 is my friend David Snyder, an amazing placemaker from WA. Again, the movie that you have seen at the beginning, he initiated that, which is fantastic, with Brooke, who is now a famous movie maker, which is awesome. So he's doing 7 Senses activations and placemaking actually all over Australia for a long time. And he's a co-founder of the Town Teams movement, which is just incredible. And we have to bring that to Queensland as well. The 6th one and final guest presenter is Katie Holt, president of UDAL, the Urban Design Alliance of Queensland. And actually, Katie, I met in 2013 as well, where she was the associate professor and head of urban design at QUT. And she nearly signed me up to do a PhD with QUT. But when I actually submitted my abstract, Mirko and herself said, Toby, these are 10 PhDs. You have to focus on one. So I still haven't got to that point to focus on one, but maybe that could be a future thing that I will be doing to actually maybe do a PhD. The other thing I really wanted to thank the co-founder, Linda Cupid. Without her, I would have never started the 7 Senses Foundation. So Linda and myself, we were on the UDAL board in 2013. And both really passionate to make change. And Linda developed the website. Linda developed the Facebook page. Linda really did a lot of the groundwork there. And she just had her 3rd child. So she retired from Seven Senses, but again, big shout out to her. Without her, it wouldn't have happened. The other quick mention I want to make is to Brett McKenzie. He was my first employer in Australia when I came here, actually for a holiday, never left, because he really inspired me, an amazing mentor. And we did actually the first Seven Senses garden at his farm in Barney Creek. My wife, Hilke, and myself did that. And so he really appreciates and is a big supporter of that. And that was before we even started the Seven Senses Foundation. So as I said, Hilke introduced me to the Seven Senses framework. And then another little shout out to Rob and Amy Waddell that actually did the first Seven Senses design with me together for the Building Trust internationally, where we used Alma Road in Clayfield and turned that into a Seven Senses street to raise awareness for one, that streets can be more than traffic channels, so that they can be human corridors, but also to raise awareness about different disabilities and how we can actually in a streetscape engage. So really create this human corridor where everybody can come together and it's not just for the cars, where the community can meet. So I could go on and that would be the whole night gone just on things. So my favorite saying is, alone we can go so far, but together we can go so much further. And this is really what this night and this celebration again is all about, to hear from you. And again, without you, we wouldn't be where we are and we wouldn't be where we will be in the future. So in my last presentation, I'll talk a little bit about where the future will be and introduce my new partner within the Seven Senses, Ben, as well. So pretty excited. All right. So as I mentioned, we have this 7 amazing speakers. We start off with Hilke to really explain the 7 senses in a little bit more depth than I normally do it. And she obviously introduced me to them. So Hilke, fire away. 7 minutes.
Hi everyone, it's good to be here tonight and talk about the 7 senses. So I find this whole 7 minutes thing very challenging, you probably agree, because the 7 senses are so in depth, you could talk about them for 7 days, 7 months, 7 years. So I'm gonna go through quite quickly and any questions you have later, I'm all good to give it a try and answer those. All right, so wherever one or more senses that we have are compromised, this particular person struggles a lot to feel safe in our environment and actually has trouble moving about freely. I see this every day in my work as a remedial therapist. I'm an aromatherapist as well. And I see every day people who struggle with the impairment of one or more senses. The interesting fact is really that we can't separate these senses from one another, but we'll do this tonight. All right. So we have 4 close senses. We call them close because they're close to our brain. Those are vision, smell, taste, and our hearing. And then we have the further away senses or the far senses. It's 3 of them. We have the tactile system, our skin, the vestibular, which is the balance, and the proprioceptive system, which is the deep sense of our body. So let's start with smell. Our sense of smell is quite underestimated, actually. So we just take it for granted. A possible sense, it is probably the sense that can best provoke memories and feelings because it is so close to our limbic system in our brain. So the receptors of our nose are so closely related to the old primitive part of the brain, which was also present in the very first mammals on Earth. And it is still here today because it plays a really major role in controlling mood and emotions, behavior, and memory. So this is why when we smell a certain perfume, for example, it reminds us possibly about a person, like our grandma maybe. If we smell the cooking of garlic somewhere along the streets, it might remind us of our holiday in Italy. So these reminders, these memories can be positive and negative. So, for example, if you go into a school and you didn't have a good time at school yourself, then it might provoke a little bit of a feeling of stress. And hospitals might even remind you of pain that you've had before. So smell is very powerful. And I like that we put the mouth right next to it here, because the mouth and the nose pretty much go together. You can't really taste anything without having your nose involved as well. So mostly important, the mouth and the taste is in the early years, in the early childhood. During this time, the mouth is the primary source of information, its most important source of contention, and an effective method of expression and exploration of our environment. So a growing child seriously asks itself the question, it is unconsciously, but they ask themselves, I wonder what this object tastes like. So they put everything into their mouth, the USB stick, the piece of Lego, a book, they put everything in, because our brain needs to actually taste so it can put it into the portfolio and work with it all life. We have about 10,000 taste buds when we are adults. When we get older, this declines. It drops down to about 5,000 because they do not get replaced that frequently. We can taste sour, bitter, sweet, salty, and something that we call umami. It's coming from the Asian countries and quite new to our Western world. All right, next one is tactile system. So the tactile system is our touch system, and so it is quite noticeable. So it is our skin, our receptors lie in the skin, and it covers the whole body. It is very noticeable that we have two parts. We have a defensive system, which is like the danger kind of alert system, and then we have the discriminative system. They turn each other off if one of them gets activated. So I need the defensive system on all the time to keep safe. So for example, if anything comes in from the back and touches me, I can react to it. I judge it, and if it's okay, we can just move on to the next. There's unfortunately children who really struggle with this kind of turning off mechanism, and these children will feel touch as constant ongoing pain. So yes, it's a good thing to provide lots of sensory, so tactile experiences in our environment. We have the hearing. It is processing and perception of energy and movement and vibration. We perceive this information. We learn how to perceive it in our early childhood, and our hearing has to be tuned like a radio. Our ears also serve as eyes at the back of the head. So when I'm on a bike, I need to be able to estimate what's going on behind me. Obviously, I cannot look back all the time. So our ears help us to bring in information to keep us safe and let us move freely through the environment. All right, so going a bit faster, I guess, but anyway, our visual sense is a powerful sense, and it helps to control everything that we do, our movement. It is important to notice that we have actually two eyes, and two eyes bring in two pictures. It needs to be combined to one picture. And that's actually a very clever process that our brain does here. So then we need this information to be processed correctly. So we need to be able to separate elements of a visual image. We need to know that a fallen tree is still a tree, although it has fallen down. We just know trees usually from upright positions. If objects change positions, we know we can still recognize them as trees or whatever it is. Two to go, vestibular and proprioception. So the vestibular system and the proprioceptive system often get neglected. So these are the two extra ones that many people don't know about. Health professionals do, although they often don't see them or don't know that they're actually senses. Our vestibular sense is developed 16 weeks into pregnancy, so really early, although sometimes it doesn't get developed well enough. So it can be easily overloaded, and it can also happen that not enough input is delivered to our brain via the balance system. So two classic situations on a playground. So there's two children. One's overload, one is sensory deprived of this sense. So one is on the spinner and goes forever, can go for an hour, will never get dizzy. It needs more information. And then we have the other child that stands on the side of the playground, also having vestibular issues, but this child has an overload of that information and knows, I don't trust my balance system at all. I'm going to stand on the side and watch. I don't dare to get involved. And last but not least, our proprioceptive sense is our deep sense. So our deep sense, our receptors lie in our muscles, tendons, joints, and they give us information about our body position. So if you'll close your eyes right now and you don't look at your feet, you know exactly where they are and you know exactly where your toe is pointing to, northwest, east, no matter what. If your proprioceptive system is working well, it will tell you what's going on. So kids who struggle with this kind of sense, they always want to go and lift heavy boxes, they push heavy things, they pull, they jump, they're forever on the trampoline. So yeah, we see these children trying to bring in this sensory information to build up on this. And that's all our 7 senses, basically done really fast. It is important that we engage our 7 senses through the environment, and there's huge opportunities to provide spaces that cater for everyone.
Thanks, Heike. That was so much more depth than I normally do. And, well, we went 1.5 minutes over.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
We cut it off from someone else.
That's, that's right. You are excused. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Deb Cushing. I'm in landscape architecture at QUT, and I've actually been working with Tobias since 2013. I actually went back to my earliest emails of when we first connected, way back when. So it has been a long time. So my first interaction with Tobias was actually when I invited him in. I taught a class called People in Place, and this was for landscape architecture students, second-year landscape architecture students who were learning about how people interact with their environment, how we impact our environment, how our environment impacts us. And so this was really actually an exercise in developing awareness and excitement in those students. And Tobias did an amazing job, as he's a very engaging speaker. And the students were always really excited about what he presented, and I think they learned a lot. But I will say, and I'm glad Hilke said this as well, I think the vestibular and proprioceptive senses were always the challenge for the students to get right away. So I think he had to go over those quite a bit. But I think it was a great way to introduce these concepts of 7 senses and how we can design our environments in different ways to get people excited and to kind of use those different senses in more creative ways and do that better. So that was sort of the first interactions I had with Tobias. And many of those students actually used those ideas in later projects. And I know they invited him to kind of give advice and mentor them in their projects. So then that led to, we did we were still doing an ARC linkage project called Intergenerational Park Design for Active and Engaged Communities. And the idea is really to reconceptualize the suburban parks to make them more exciting and more usable, and really focus, even though there's a large focus on physical activity, and that's to address the huge rates of inactivity that we have in our culture right now, in our society. It's also about building connections across different generations. So the intergenerational piece is key. And so even though a lot of the work that Tobias does in the 7 senses is focused on children, I think one of the really exceptional and exciting opportunities is actually get the young and old together and think about how the senses are appropriate for both age groups and in between as well. And so we're in the last stages of this project. We've done multiple methods to collect data and analyze it and come up with some key findings. But one of the outcomes is actually to produce some design guidelines for intergenerational parks. And I'm excited this is just beginning. So we'll actually get to see how the 7 senses can we can put those into those design guidelines and make sure that they come out into the parks that are designed in the future, or parks that are improved. So that focused a little bit more on the suburban environments. Next, we actually worked on, we did a workshop, it was now a year ago, which is hard to believe, but it was playable urban design is sort of what we called it, because we found that there were not as many people in the suburban parks as we wanted to kind of connect with and to make a difference for. So we thought taking it to more urban settings would be a good approach. And again, it focuses on playable spaces, making things more lively, again, using the senses, appealing to the different senses to get people excited and moving more. So again, it's a little bit, again, about physical activity and just getting people moving and being active and engaged, but also connecting across the ages. So that's still ongoing. We're actually looking at applying for a grant coming up here, so that stay tuned on that one. Next, this was one we actually finished, and luckily we finished it last year before COVID hit, so we didn't have an issue with going into the schools. But we worked with Oakley State School in Ash Grove, and we had, I forget the grade, I think it was second grade or grade 2, year 2 students, and we ran a workshop, a design charrette with them, and we talked to them about some of the senses, and Tobias was there, and we actually had the students all do a sensory audit of their school grounds to kind of figure out what was there, what they saw, what they noticed, what they heard, what they touched, taste, everything. So that was a really great experience for them, and they discussed it and they reflected on it. And then we were able to, through this grant, we were able to actually create an AR game, just a pilot version of it, and we piloted it with the students. And so there was a little I think it was a dingo that was their icon, and they had to do some little things. It was very small because of the amount of cost that it actually takes to create a game. And I am no expert in that. But it was really exciting to see how the younger students really embrace sort of these ideas, especially in the sensory audit, but also when we went back and talked to them and they kind of reflected on certain things about what they heard and saw and felt and things like that. And so that was really exciting to see. We also did have QT students involved in this process, and they helped with the design charrette. So a lot of their ideas actually fed into the game. And so it all kind of came together in that realm. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about actually was, so Yvonne Miller, who is actually the director of the design lab, the QT's design lab, she and I wrote a book called Creating Great Places. And in it, we actually highlighted the Seven Senses Foundation and Tobias's work, and had some images of different kids engaging with different elements in the urban environment. And we actually, I think we brought up kind of just some of the different theories that could inform how we design those spaces. And that was in the focused chapter on child-friendly cities. And we recently, even though this was through Tobias's work with urban play, I think the Seven Senses definitely relates to this. We actually held a design series. So we had a 4-part webinar series and talked about how all the theories could be applied. We had this process called theory storming, and how the theories could inform how we design spaces for multiple age groups and for different reasons, and kind of to make spaces more effective. And it was a little bit on placemaking, but also just how do we create better spaces that fit the needs of the population. And then what Tobias did was actually apply sort of the practical aspects and how this could be applied in practice, and some of the projects that they've done, and really tied those academic and theory and research into practice. So really making it kind of real, and showing how it's not just an academic kind of discussion that we're having, that you know, this is all great, but it actually can be applied and have an impact on how people use space and how people engage with it, and across the age groups and that kind of thing. So I don't know where I'm at on my 7 minutes, but.
Absolutely, like 1 minute over. So you have improved. It was 1.5 minutes over. You're 1 minute over. Fantastic.
Well, thank you.
That's
So I'll
so
stop
good.
sharing now.
That was so great, Deb. And again, with this webinar series was so much fun. And for a lot of people maybe that couldn't join, like there is, all these recordings are on the QUT website, I believe. Is that right, Shelley?
That's right. They're on the QUT Design Lab website, which is qut.design, or they're on our QUT Design Lab YouTube channel.
Thank you so much. So now we go to Matt Constance.
Okay, so I wish to talk, I guess, a little bit about bringing those practicalities and the theory, you know, or bringing the theory to practice and actually delivering, and a little bit about my journey in delivering the All Abilities Playground at Leslie Patrick Park in Arana Hills. So I've kind of broken it down into 7 steps, or tried to a little bit along the way, and we'll see how it ties in. But you know, it's all part of, you know, when you have an idea as an advocate, and we all come across people, whether me as the counsellor, yourselves as academics, or you know, in Tobias's work actually building the playgrounds, people that have an idea. So back in 2016, I was elected to council, excuse me, and I'd actually been pushing for a number of years already to get this idea of an all ages, all abilities playground delivered in our community. One of the things I had to realize early on was that it couldn't just be a pipe dream. I had to actually test the idea, and fortunately, my involvement with people with disabilities gave me a good network to begin with, a good grounding. I was able to test the idea with friends, but also with professionals. And I think that's a really important thing, because you get a lot of people that advocate for an idea, and as I've got there on the slide, your friends will always have a friendly bias. When you get the group think, there's bias. So make sure when you've got an idea, you actually go and test the idea with people outside of your normal circles. So I did that. And one of the things that I learned pretty quickly was, you know, I had to find my, know who my allies were. Actually, and you know, within council, one of the things I found early on was when I first presented the project to the staff, was I was actually told, councillor, we don't do that. We don't build playgrounds on the scale you're thinking. And I was presenting an idea for an all ages, all abilities playground that literally was all that. It was a huge space for everyone from a child to grandparents with Alzheimer's and dementia. So people in wheelchairs, people with visual impairments, everything that you could think of, I wanted to try and provide something for in this space. But the idea was to also bring the whole community together so everyone could play in one spot. So the staff were a little bit resistant initially, but we had a couple of good stuff, such as our head of open space planning, Wes Mortensen. And he started to realize I was pretty serious about this. So I had to keep building my network though. And there are the obvious ones, the staff, the industry reps, the community advocates, people living with disabilities. They were an easy tick in the column for being an ally to the project. But there were people that you probably don't think about. And it's the community groups, all the businesses that are open to the idea of contributing money, because we're seeing more and more of a shift to social fulfillment and in businesses. You know, many businesses now, their boards set social goals for involvement, but also finding your economic development manager in council. And I'll touch on that one a bit more in a moment. So you have to present your case. You have to know the who, why, what, where, but you've also, I had all these ideas in my head, but I had to be prepared to learn and be adaptable. I was probably a little stubborn along the way, but it was also because going into council, I did know and had a lot more, and sounds very arrogant, but probably knowledge of what needed to be done in this space. Council had never taken on a project of this scale. We'd, like many councils, like many levels of state government, I think, you know, there'd been an idea that inclusion was expensive, so let's try and just do the bare minimum. So we, you know, I had to continue that, know exactly what I wanted. And I provided a fairly detailed brief to staff on what I thought we needed and how we needed to include it and why. One of the parts of this process, though, was also realizing that because there was no body of work in council to provide the evidence, we needed partners, and I needed to find opportunities to build my case for this playground. Now, putting it in perspective, this playground isn't just, you know, your $150,000 worth of equipment that, you know, Tobias in his other work does, you know, every day of the week. This was a $2.2 million playground facility. It has completely inclusive amenities blocks, yeah, the whole works. So, but we needed to build the evidence up for that. So part of what I did was also, while working on and advocating for the project in the background, brought forward in front of everyone, in front of our whole community, the issues of access and inclusion in the region, and moved a motion in September 2016 for the council to create the region's first access and inclusion plan, which I was quite shocked we didn't have, but we simply didn't. And what that allowed us to do was actually, it gave us an impetus to start really working a lot more closely with our allies as an organisation at QT, with USC as well. We've got studies going on, and we partner in looking at intergenerational parks planning and outdoor planning. We built a network of supporters and partners through the local communities. So that's my timer telling me I'm running over. So let me see if I can speed this up. Moving on from building, seeing the opportunities and finding ways to back your project, you do need to identify your obstacles. And again, those partners will help you identify and overcome them. So whether it's your budget issues, partnering with corporates or with community groups to find additional funding, knowing those obstacles early on will help you identify and navigate around them through a project like this. That there is a photo of the goal. That's what I set. It is pretty much like for like with what the early concepts were that the staff developed from my words. It's an award-winning playground. We just won the Parks and Leisure Australia Queensland Award for Best Playground over $500,000. But the really interesting thing with economic development is, with access and inclusion, I think is knowing, and the 7 senses stuff is knowing what's next opportunities are. And in summary, putting all this together, when you look at the future trading partners of Australia, and I said this to Toby the other day, over the next 20 years, you're looking at Indonesia and India and countries throughout Asia, which are going to move into being some of our biggest trading partners, also looking to bring local operations to Australia. They're multi-generational families by culture. And I think what you'll see is if we can develop ourselves to be an inclusive and accessible region with the 7 senses, it builds a desire for people to want to visit and live here. And so we need to work with business community and the council to continue to push the 7 senses message across the region.
Thank you so much, Matt. That's amazing. Your passion is so good, and to see how you drive it in cars and all the loops you have to go through, just like a true inspiration. Thanks, Heath. So now we go over to Nick, who will talk about human factors.
Thank you, Tobias. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm here on Gubbi Gubbi land on the Sunshine Coast, an important acknowledgement during NAIDOC week as well. So look, this evening I'd like to share some work we've done with the Seven Senses Foundation and really how it continues to offer insights to equitable, inclusive public space. And I hope you find it interesting. So by way of a bit of a background, the work that we do in our research centre takes this systems approach, and that's in recognition of the complexity of cities. Indeed, their increasing complexity. It's this recognition that in fact the current practice-led business as usual approaches, they just don't cut it anymore, and they're failing us. In our cities, we don't feel happier, safer or more connected. Chronic disease, health issues are escalating, people are feeling lonelier, and in fact we need fresh perspectives. In cities, we continue to look at the parts in isolation, planning, architecture, community development, often in silos. So what we seek to do is consider all of this complexity and all of these elements together, and we do so from a human factors and from a human-centered perspective. So that's talking about people as assets in the system, technology as a tool to assist, not to replace, responsibility to all stakeholders. So these are a few of the values that underpin our work. So we've looked at a range of urban environments from smart city in this way, smart cities, main streets, playgrounds, and of course, public space. And in 2015, we developed a systems model of what equitable, inclusive and accessible public spaces may represent, including the Seven Senses approach. We consider here that public space is a community health asset. It's good for us physically, it's good for us mentally. So, a Seven Senses public space as a systems model looks like this. And now this can be a bit overwhelming, but it's in fact a simple but not simplistic representation of the complexity of what we're actually hoping to achieve. If we have a look at a summarized version, it's really intended to represent an ideal model, like a gold standard of inclusive, equitable and accessible public spaces. But if we have a look at how the relationships work, it's a really powerful tool because it describes the entire system, from the aspirations that we have at the very top to the resources that are available to us at the very bottom. So at the very top, you have the purposes. Why does the public space exist? And if it's a public health asset, it's about a healthy and happy community, inclusiveness and healthy individuals. On the next level down, we have the ways in which we can measure the success of those purposes. In the middle, importantly, you have the activities or functions the system needs to perform. So we can see here our sensory-related functions, safety-related, service and enhancement. And then on the bottom two levels are the processes and the objects associated with the system, the resources available to feed up. So it's a model that can be used for the evaluation of existing environments or the design or redesign of new public spaces as well. If we have a quick example of how it works, so you can see what we use is what we call means-ends links, but it's this why, what, how relationship. So if we explore a node in the middle, so these are the functions that the system needs to perform. Here it's provide tactile surfaces or sensory experience. So if this node is what, the connections above it are why we seek to achieve it, and the connections below are how we seek to achieve it. And those why-what relationships actually work on every node right across the system. And it's how you build it and it's how you actually explore it as well. So the ideal model was subsequently piloted and applied to 2 existing public spaces and to explore the difference that the Seven Senses approach could make. And it was during a Seven Sense Day event, one on the Sunshine Coast and one in Brisbane. And they were examined before and then during the Seven Senses Day. And what we're able to see is some changes, changes in the affordances that particular objects would provide. So to highlight some, providing areas to wait were enhanced, all of the sensory elements were enhanced, surfaces for activities were also enhanced as well. So more recently, we've actually been able to use that kind of archetypal ideal model to actually explore public space under COVID conditions. So it's an enduring model that we've developed. Our first study explored lockdown restrictions, and because we're talking about public health assets, we could identify those middle functions that ceased under lockdown and how that actually impacted health and community connectiveness. In the second study, we looked at other types of disasters for the design of public space, and what happens if we take a safety critical view of public space. What if we start thinking about public space as an essential health asset? Then we change our perceptions of it. And the third study included some design interventions. So this again looked at the model, how the virus impacted or could impact all of the nodes across it, and explored ways in which we could build the adaptive capacity of public space to keep it available. So briefly, some key insights. Look, the first, and this is true of the 7 senses and the work that we've been doing, the notion of cooperation is required to underpin community use. There's new social norms that require individuals to be much more aware of their own spatial relationships in those surroundings. There's also a really important element of teamwork that's important for public space to support that. This notion of separation in public space is kind of new, but it's also in line with the 7 senses work, that public spaces need to offer choice for people. They need to offer choice in activity and interaction. And indeed, when we offer separation and we include elements like retreat spaces, we're in fact making them way more inclusive as well. What's also clear is context is important, Melbourne versus Sunshine Coast Parks, and importantly, the adaptive capacity of spaces is actually a consequence of the humans in that system. In the public space, it's the dependence on people that make it flexible. And that's really important in finishing the design. And that's a core systems principle. And I think it's a core principle for 7 senses. So look, in summary, quality spaces are necessary health assets and community assets. And I believe that through a 7 senses and a systems approach, look, we can begin to establish ways for the community to all be involved.
Mike, you absolutely nailed this.
I hope I didn't rush through it too much for you. And by all means, if there's questions or comments, happy to take them all.
Well, I think it is a very complex system. And I still remember when we were in this room and we had this 3D wall all around us with all, and then we changed one thing and everything changed. So it's amazing the work you have done there. And yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem.
All right, let's head over to WA, to my friend, David Snyder. You ready to roll?
Ready to roll, Tobias.
Love it. Let's do it.
All right, well, while Tobias is loading that, I'm from Perth, WA. So I'd just like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people of WA and Perth, and to say Kaya, Wanju, Wanju. And just take a moment to reflect on the humanities and our involvement in Australia. Aboriginal First Nations people have been here for at least 40,000 years. We know that, that's an absolute fact. Since colonialization, we've been in Perth, been here for less than 200 years. And if we think about that in a long-term time frame, think of the impact that we've had on our country, and maybe even the lack of understanding we have of the history and culture, and just the importance of things like NAIDOC Week and other events to share learnings and find out more about what kind of Australia really means. So yeah, just say that as my acknowledgement, and now I'll get started. So my name's David. Like I said, I'm here from Perth. I represent an organization called Town Team Movement. We're a social enterprise, and our purpose is to empower businesses, residents, landowners to work holistically, positively, and proactively with their government authority to create great, inclusive places. So yeah, being here today and learning from Tobias for the last 5-6 years has been an incredible journey. So thank you very much, Tobias, and great work for putting this on today. Like I said, I met Tobias probably 5-6 years ago, and we were having a drink at the pub and talking about skateboarding. And we were talking about skateboarding as landscape design, and he said to me, "Did you know that skateboarding is actually a sensory design?" And I had never thought of that, and it just kind of from there just kind of opened my thinking up to what sensory design means in our public spaces. So so that's going to be what my presentation is about. I'm probably repeating a lot of things that have already been said. So I'll try to keep it as fresh as I can, I think on the fly. Oh, can you go to the next slide, Tobias? You're my admin person now. So, but great places don't just happen. And I really love this quote from William White, one of the kind of placemaking pioneers. He says, "It's difficult to design a place that will not attract people. What's remarkable is how often this has been accomplished." And I think if we look at this image of the playground, it's probably a perfect example of that. You know, it's really interesting because it actually has all the ingredients of a great place and potentially a great inclusive place with good sensory design, but no one's actually thought about how it's going to be used and thought enough about inclusion and about what this place means to its local community. And because of it, it's a fenced off, gated area and there's no one around. So for me, it's always a really great introduction to think why we need to think about form and function and design and creating inclusive places and communities. Tobias, can you please go to my next slide? So that's part of the reason why I got involved with the Seven Senses Street Day. And part of it was Tobias nagging me for months saying, "You do placemaking, you need to do this and learn more about seven senses." So finally, I agreed to getting involved in the Perth Seven Senses Street Day. And actually just being on the ground and seeing the other activities and you know, creating my own creative activities, it really did teach me about what Seven Senses is all about. So if you haven't done it before, don't wait for the official Seven Senses Street Day. Just do it tomorrow.
Absolutely.
It's a great way to learn. All right. My secretary, can you please go to the next slide?
Absolutely.
So these are the 7 things that I learned from being part of a sensory experience. The first learning is that sensory experiences do not have to be complicated to implement. We had lots of things on our Seven Senses Day that were incredibly simple. This is an image of 2 girls looking for the sounds of birds and trying to identify them kind of in their natural area. And we had everything we did was really simple. The activity I was involved in was getting people to take photos of their local area. And learning, which brings me to my next point, learning about the 7 senses, it's fun, it's interactive and engaging. And I think this is probably, like most of you know, being educators, is how we should be teaching our community, how we can be getting them more involved in learning about inclusive communities. So designing a space does not always need to be expensive and completed by an expert. I think if we understand the principles of 7 senses and we have a discussion with some of the professionals and we learn that communities can often do it themselves. And the 7 Senses Street Day is a really great example of that. So learning and applying the 7 senses approach is also incredibly creative. And it ensures that we don't get places like I showed in the previous slide. It really makes us think about what should go into our place and how it can be even more inclusive. So the 5th thing I learned is that Tobias is an absolute weirdo. And that's what we and that's what we really love about him. Because he's fun and he's engaging and he does a great job of teaching us about 7 senses. The 6th thing is that it's a great way to inform permanent public space design. So I think Deb raised this previously. It's an awesome way to experiment with public spaces in a very cheap, quick and affordable way. And finally, the first thing I learned about skateboarding is that 7 senses isn't just for people that are in a wheelchair or have a disability. 7 senses is actually for everyone. And that's really what we're trying to create when we're making great places. So thank you, Tobias, for teaching me 7 things about a sensory experience. All right, so 7 senses not just taught me about design, but it also taught me a lot about community placemaking. And the 2 points I want to raise here what I found from experiences like this is that 50% of what we learn in getting involved in these projects is about the temporary or permanent change to create a place for people, a place that people want to be in and get involved in. But 50% is also about the change to people's thinking and becoming more active and involved in their community and learning how to create more inclusive places. So I think these, there might be simple, but they're quite important lessons that we can apply to community placemaking. So we often say that, you know, placemaking and creating inclusive spaces isn't about creating places for the community, it's about creating places with the community. All right, so I'm probably going to be a bit quick, but the most important thing that I learned about getting involved with Tobias and Seven Senses and community placemaking is that people are your best asset. Get them involved. You know, we should be seeing Seven Senses street days and designs all over Australia. And in the next 7 years, Tobias, I'm putting on that to you to make it happen and being a driver.
Absolutely. We're on its way, man. It will happen.
Excellent.
Worldwide. It will be worldwide, man.
And all of these images are courtesy of a local social enterprise called Camera Story and Brooke Williams, and they're all from our local street day event. It's time for some shameless self-promotion. So now that we've learned all about what Tobias is doing, feel free to find out more about town teams and how you can make it happen. So here's our socials and how to get in touch with us. So that's everything I have to say today. But again, just a huge thanks to Tobias and for everyone to coming out. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, David. That was absolutely epic, and man, learned so much from you, and always learn more and more from you. And I just think it's amazing what you're doing there with town teams. And again, that needs to happen everywhere. So we wanted to start that here in Queensland as well. So hopefully that is kicking off shortly. Katie, you're ready?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Can't wait.
So thank you very much, Tobias, for the invitation. It was very pleasurable starting to go over the Seven Senses material again. The trouble is, in 7 minutes, I have 7 points and 21 slides. So I wasn't as good as these other people. The first point is we now have the global evidence to show that where we live, work and recreate have a significant bearing on our health and well-being. COVID-19 has brought this home to each and every one of us in a very practical way, with the lockdowns around Australia illustrating just how important our physical environment is for our health. Without labouring this point, you may recall those images of these high-rise apartment buildings in Melbourne swarming with police, while their inhabitants faced incarceration in small, overcrowded spaces, long before the entire city and state went into emergency lockdown. The role of the urban designer is to facilitate the way people interact with and use space. Sensory design can enhance or impede our connection with the world while celebrating the qualities of place. Universal design principles have gone a long way to make buildings and cities physically accessible for more people. But for people who experience cognitive impairment, neurodiversity, or sensory difference, the city remains an urban jungle, difficult to navigate and almost impossible to traverse unaccompanied. Misinterpretation of the built environment, memory lapses, inability to solve problems, and unsuccessful navigation of space can result in high levels of anxiety, distress, temper outburst, disorientation, dizziness, and even fainting. These impressions of space can comprise a shifting mix of sensory experiences, either heightened sensitivities where too much information is picked up, or not enough information to make interactions meaningful. Accommodating people with sensory overload has typically not been a consideration when designing public places. The focus has largely been on physical disability or vision impairment. Why should we care? The prevalence of some form of disability is widespread with approximately 4 million Australians experience some form of disability, alongside a population which is rapidly aging. These factors create compounded sensory challenges or neurodiversity that increases as we age. Sensory design embraces human diversity. A research project that our team conducted some years ago when I first met Tobias was with Logan City Council and QSID at the Mater Hospital, and it revealed just how inhospitable and alienating public space could be for people experiencing sensory differences. Using techniques for mapping different senses, our urban design master's students mapped a precinct in Logan that included a railway station, strip shopping, schools, parks, and a shopping centre. They recorded and located different senses along the walk and rated their experiences. One student, now a practicing designer, Michael Mitchell, developed a novel iconographic notation to record his experiences. His analytical mapping and rating levels have proved most useful in identifying where to focus design interventions and modify public places. British artist and designer, Dr. Kate McLean, specialises in mapping eye-invisible sense data. Her doctoral research was structured around revealing spatial and temporal characteristics of smellscapes or olfactory landscapes. In her Smellscapes of Singapore, McLean explored 7 neighbourhoods with 200 local residents. The data revealed the importance of volume in the spatial understanding and experience of smell, even when some smells were lost to perception as they volatilize and diffuse, or rise too high or sink too low to be ordinarily detected by the human nose. What McLean uncovered shows how valuable smell is in defining a place. Smells form part of the lived space, incorporating people, built environment, and natural landscape in which they're detected. More than simply chemical molecules, smells in place have meaning and memories attached to them. Which finally brings us to cities. The cities we love and remember easily are those that fill our senses and our memories of those senses. Bergen, Bologna, Barcelona, Bangkok, Brisbane, to mention a few. Cities that we experience through multiple senses simultaneously. These cities offer up places that draw you in, spaces with smells, colours, textures, artworks, fountains, music, and buskers. They are cities that are walkable and offer protection from the elements, with safe places to sit or linger longer, and embedded infrastructure for free Wi-Fi or charging phones. Sensory design and the 7 senses framework encourages people to engage with cities and the communities they live in, to be curious about the places and spaces around them. By concentrating our design efforts early on in the planning, we can animate spaces, incite interaction, and create contact between people, mitigating the necessity of dealing with long-term health problems later on. During COVID lockdowns, Brisbane fared better than many other cities around the world, with a benign climate and sensorial landscape of subtropical vegetation, prolific bird life, and serviced by more public parks and open space around our homes, making life during lockdown quite bearable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you all. This is just really, really appreciate and fantastic. I just wrap up now with my little 7 minutes. And then let's have a bit of a discussion and a chat. And Deb will actually facilitate that Q&A session before we open a bottle of champagne and sing happy birthday all together. How good is that? All right. Again, quickly talking about the past. This is actually a Udall event. So that was actually beyond accessibility. That was and architects together and urban designers and really discussed this idea. How could a city of 7 senses look like? And how can we actually provide wayfinding through smell and taste and all these different things? It was a great initiative and it was actually adapted in the plan, but I guess the implementation is still the challenge. The other thing was after this event, we started really the foundation. So as I mentioned earlier, Linda Cupid and myself thought, how can we actually drive change and how can we actually show people what the 7 senses really mean? And David Snyder showed that perfectly as well with the 7 senses street days. And the idea was really to create something simple that people get, that people can engage with, that doesn't cost much, and then we can engage each other only 6 weeks to do the first national 7 senses street day. But we thought, well, we called a few people that we know and said, come on, get involved, make this happen. And it was amazing. So many people got involved in the first year with 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, we developed a website, we developed a Facebook page, we developed this whole to-do thing, like from A to Z. If you want to get engaged, this is what you need to do. You need to go to your local council to get an approval. We actually, at the 7 Cent Street at Alma Road, we didn't get an approval because it cost $250 and the fine was $250. So we said, give it a shot, and nobody actually fined us. What we did as well, because I'm from Germany and I grew up on a play street, it was not about closing the entire street off and then having the 7 senses party and then the next day the cars come in. During the day, we left the street open. So we had all these different nodes, but the cars could still meander through. And first, some people were like nervous and just stayed in their little nodes. But during the day, suddenly everybody was playing on the street and the cars, nobody drove in fast because they were like, oh, wow, it's activated. So they slowed down. So it was really a coexistence between vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists as well. And as I said, we just set it up for Alma Road. It should come up with a few photos here. Then Toowong got involved as well in Brisbane, showing different activities. And then, as I said, it was unbelievable. Within 6 weeks, we got events all over the country using this idea of tactical urbanism, just starting an idea, knocking at some neighbors' door and say, come on, let's do that. On the 16th of November, actually, it was a Saturday, and it was just incredible. So the other thing what I found is sometimes with this, there's another initiative you probably all know about is Parking Day. So you start these tactile short-term interventions, which are great, but then how can we actually really create a long-term outcome? So we combine tactical urbanism with an ecological community development mind, and that was a project where we worked together with Nick Stevens as well from the USC to then measure for this neighborhood in Palmwoods, how can we actually get the community involved from the very early beginnings, and then how can the 7 senses framework be implemented not just on that day, but actually in the culture and in the spirit of that neighborhood, and they still actually use it in their market days, and it's part of their identity now. So we got 7 champions in the community. So each of these persons took 1 sense to look after for that day and change that space where they were in to really focus on it. So here's some images coming through. And you see it's a bit of a hippie community in the Sunshine Coast, but it's just a beautiful spirit there, and they really adapted to the 7 senses. There's another guy that I love that lives near Palmwoods. His name is called David Dangerfield, and he runs a business called Compass. So he employs young adults with intellectual disabilities. So people from all over Australia actually move to Palmwoods because their partners or child can actually work for him on this farm and be part of the community. So it was a beautiful spirit there. And the research really showed how much impact it has on the actually built environment, which was great. Again, you saw that. That was an experience in itself to really get all these documents together. My friend Simon Maha did it in Cairns. Again, came up beautifully. And just again, as David said, it's not expensive. It's simple things. What you have in your backyard, actually bring that to your front yard. What some people have in their garage, just bring it out, and really conclusive communities. You need to build the trust within our communities. And that's the biggest problem. Like people go open their electronic gate. Oh, really? the electronic gate, go into the house and they don't even know who their neighbors are. So these initiatives really bring the community together, create trust. Suddenly you know all your neighbors. So I'm fine that my child drives around the neighborhood because I know there's multiple eyes looking at him or her. And then every year we actually have a National 7 Senses Day, but as David said, we're encouraging people now to do it on every day of the week and to turn actually your front yard. So you don't need any approvals for that. This is actually your space. You can turn to sensory experiences every day of the week. Again, Perth one we heard about. The Adelaide one was to pay a fee. They all could actually just change their verge to a 7 senses experience and engage with that. And we also use the 7 senses framework for community consultation. And I think that's another thing, or participation. A lot of times when we do these things and we talk about physical elements in the community consultation, people go, oh, I hate this street, always drops things on my car. So we always talk about the physical objects and not the sensory engagement that we have. So through that, we actually build rapport and people agree to the same goals, and then the actually outcomes that need to be achieved are, well, we all agreed we wanted to have natural shade. What does that mean? So it's just a different approach to get the community together to agree on these overall outcomes. So how do we go beyond accessibility? We developed the framework we talked about. So this is really about, for one, being thought-provoking. So really getting people to engage with the 7 senses. And that just brings another layer to the design, that we don't have this space that David showed where you go like, well, there's an asset, but nobody will use it anyway. The communal aspect. So how do we really, the space facilitates the communal activity and promotes a sense of community. Universal design principles need to be ticked anyway. How it's connected within the setting where it is. That it is transitional. It's not just for one use, it's actually for all coming together and creating the just right places, so choices for all. So if I feel I want to be out there, there's a space for it. If I feel I need prospect refuge, I need something, there is a space for that. And it needs to be achievable to really show the community, yes, we don't have to spend millions of dollars on this master plan that will probably never happen anywhere. And then we do something that costs so much and we will never get to the overall outcome. We tend to do little things that really change the spirit and get the community involved to be really part of that. And then, so where's the future of the 7 senses? So as I said, like for 7 years, we started with Linda Cupid. I went to so many conferences. I did a lot of presentations. We did a lot of research, and all of that is amazing and it's fun. And we did a lot of parks. But how can we actually go beyond that? So how can we help every single person in Australia or even all over the world that has sensory challenges to go like, oh wow, there's some solutions I could do in my backyard or front yard. And I'm so excited to now have my mate Ben here to actually help with bringing the foundation, I guess, on a web platform as well to really address everybody. So Ben, maybe you want to introduce yourself and just talk us a little bit through this.
Hi everyone. Toby introduced me to the concepts of 7 senses, I think probably 6 months
around 6 months
ago now. He actually brought it up with me 6 months prior, but because he's so excitable about everything, I couldn't discern between his excitement for 7 senses and everything else. But so 6 months down the track, Toby took me aside and talked me through the framework. And I think for me, like, I was just so amazed at how much I didn't know about senses and sensory perception. I mean, I have a daughter who has sensory processing issues, and we didn't even know, about the 7 senses and how it could be applied. And, it just occurred to me, like, I guess bringing this into design, bringing it into public space is amazing. But for me, it just didn't feel like enough. It feels like the kind of thing that, it needs to be a movement. People need to know about this in their own homes. They need to bring this into their communities. And so we started brainstorming, and I think I was probably here for a good 3 or 4 hours just thinking about, how do we help people design their own, the inside of their house, their backyards. How can we create tools so they can do this online? How can we give them access to information so they can actually understand, the things that I guess most of the people on this call or this Zoom chat would understand but so many other people just have absolutely no idea and are completely oblivious to. So how do we get this information out there? And we're so at the start of that journey, it's not funny. I mean, we're doing this, outside of hours and in our spare time and really trying to push this forward. But we do absolutely want to push this as hard as we can to drive an online community, to create a shop where people can go and find, resources and, things that they can put in their house and in their backyard to help engage the seven senses. Give resources in education to schools and streets and, help with societies there. And I guess, as I was saying to Toby this morning, in the past few weeks, I've met so many people that are just so engaged and so enthusiastic about the seven senses. I see our role is just to help empower, amplify, and help drive that movement so that we can get this message out to everyone in Australia, people around the world, about sensory engagement, about the seven senses, how people can actually take this on board, they can learn it, and in a large amount of cases, they can do these things themselves. And hopefully that message will spread, and then, more and more councils can actually start, building, spaces that are seven senses friendly. And that's I guess, the start of our journey. And, we really are passionate. And I feel like I'm absolutely coming in on the coattails, at the end of this 7-year journey. But I feel like there's a really amazing 7-year journey ahead. Really excited to be a part of it. I really want to thank Toby and Hook for the opportunity, and really want to say thank you to everyone here. Everyone here is so passionate, so amazing, and hopefully, we can all join in this movement.
To have involved, and again, you see here on the side through the whole presentation, Ben just came up with this new logo with this Septicon in the end. Still remember, like, you had so many, and you just picked this one. And I said, like, this is it. So again, it connected straight away, and it's such a refreshing source. And so happy to have you, May. And thanks everybody for the chat. Let's go into the Q&A session. Deb, did you get any chat questions already, or how do we do this?
None have come through that I see, but I think we can just open it up for questions now. I have one to start with, though. So you've done so much so far and over the last 7 years, and it's incredible to listen to all the different connections that you've made and all the different types of stakeholders, whether it's research, academia, or community, or whatever it is. I think that's great to kind of see that. So what do you think in the next 7 years? I mean, you've shared a little bit about what your vision is. What do you see will make the biggest impact, or what do you think, like, what would be your next big thing, your one thing that if you could focus on, what do you see
I think we get this online community. I think that would be just fantastic, because and there, again, as I said, alone we can go so far, together we can go so much further. So the more people connect to this community, the more knowledge will be there. Like, there's so many people that know so much about certain things. So if we bring them all together in this community where they can share, and then they can have subgroups. And like, my big vision would be in 7 years' time that we sit here, and seven senses is a knowledge hub worldwide for, if you have sensory challenges or sensory questions, that's where you go and you find a research paper on it, or you find a service provider for it, or you find an idea that I can do in my backyard when my child is sensory craving, or my grandmother needs a bit of, like all these things. There is a source where I can go and not go like, well, I'm overwhelmed, I have no idea, where do I go? That would be the first thing where people say, hey, have you heard about the seven senses? Here, this is the online community where you can find that. That would be amazing. So, or that is the biggest vision. Along this, I obviously still want to continue with research. I love to do more with audits as well, like to really get more data on what, because I think, again, we did some amazing work, but then how do we capture the key ingredients that made it then happen? And how can we then reproduce these key ingredients? The other thing I would love to do, actually, develop, for example, new furniture. So furniture that is actually designed together with health professionals. So I think, again, there's that hasn't been done. So we did with Moreton Bay, Jessie from Moreton Bay Regional Council. She was part of a park in Pine Rivers where we developed this proprioceptive seat. So a seat that looks like a beautiful art piece, but it actually gives you proprioceptive input as well. So things like that would be fantastic. But I think the key, again, we're so excited with Ben as well, this online community, I think that would be, and I have no idea, I can't even, I can take a phone call, but I can't do more than that. So all this technology, I just need to embrace it. And I think that's the way forward to really make an impact. That not, and again, for example, Matt told me they got an email that some people are driving from Dalby to Moreton Bay so that the child can play there. That's great, but then it's not great. So how can everybody that needs something like that go find some ideas and do it even in their backyard? That would be a great fulfillment for us.
That sounds good. So a couple of questions have come in. So how can we spread the sensory message in schools? This is from Shelley. I work in disability in schools and find a lot of the teachers are unaware of sensory challenges.
Absolutely. I found that every time I talk to them, and I think that's another thing where, again, just physically going and always doing these meetings, that's a hard thing. So that's another thing we want to develop. It's like an online, nearly like an online masterclass. So then we can actually say, here, Department of Education, spread that around to you, and then the schools can even do that themselves. So we don't need to always physically be there, but then we obviously will have, I guess, services as well where we can help and train others to be then a trainer as well. So to really start, I think that was always the thing. It was always me going to a conference talking about it, and then, well, we were still, I'm a father, I'm a husband, a good one, am I? So, so like we have all these different roles. So how do we actually get to everybody? And I think that's where we just need to use this technology now and film these things, do the master classes online, and then we can hopefully access so many more people. If it's schools, childcare centers, retirement villages staff, like all these things, that when people are aware of that, they actually change their behavior to certain people as well. That's the thing what I found so interesting with kids with sensory processing disorder, because a lot of times the teachers don't know, the parents a lot of times don't even know, so they don't even go to it, or it's not getting diagnosed. So then we have these people that think like, oh, Joe is just a really bad behaved kid, so he gets in trouble through all his school diet, but he just couldn't, like in the morning he put the wrong socks on, that ruined his whole day. But if some people would have understood that, he could have a totally different life at school, a totally different experience, and be a totally different human within society. So I think that is where we just need to see how we can spread it more.
Great. So then there's a couple of questions from Angela. Do you want us to actually read out your questions, or do you want me to read them out?
I can unmute.
Hey, Angela.
Hello. It's been great. So the first question was to do with how we could work together, and so how we can multiply this, because it's a little bit like Nature Play Queensland. We can't do this on our own. The more people involved, the better. How can we share resources? And so it would be really good to work together and to do a project that sorry, I've got family dinner party and 4 dogs swirling around here. It would be really great to create resources that we could share that enables families and educators to develop a whole range of, either activities or lesson plans around this that we could then share with our network. So it'd be really good to work on that together. And the second question I asked was to do with, can't remember, where is it here? That we're doing a lot of work with loose parts play. There seems to be a very big push at the moment in relation to loose parts play, and it'd be really good to work out how we can incorporate the sensory development and the 7 senses work into loose parts play, just to really add some absolute value into that that type of play, which is at the moment it seems to be taking off around the state. So there are a couple of questions there, quite different.
Absolutely, Angela. Like to both of those, like first one, obviously working together. I think the more people we get together, the better chances to make real change. So I know you just partnered up with Queensland Walks as well on some initiatives, and I think that's where we would love to be involved as well, like getting multiple people together to actually, because we have to, in a lot of things, we have the same visions.
Yep.
So how do we bring together, we bring so many more assets together, then easier to get funding as well. Obviously, everybody needs funding to make these things happen. I'm still super passionate about this, I call it a product that I developed with what you know about is like this Tales of the Hood.
Yeah.
And I think it just fits perfectly with this whole idea of nature play and human corridors and bringing neighborhoods together. So I think that's a no-brainer.
Have you spoken to Anna about that?
I spoke to Anna about it as well, and she got the information on that as well. And I think, again, it's a perfect move that we could actually do together.
Yeah,
and,
we'll talk to you soon, Anna. I can see you there.
And Anna added in the chat that she's Queensland Walks will happily share resources and encourage online masterclasses alongside nature play. And then also this week they posted on socials about story walks. Can you expand how we can tie 7 senses into story walks?
Oh. Well, and that's, it is more or less, the Tales of the Hood is the story walk. So it all blends in really nicely together. I think, again, loose play is there's so much research, obviously, about loose play and how important it is. And there's so many angles on, and that's why it's going gangbusters and why it's so important. And the sensories is just one layer that we could certainly add to that. And I think would be a great layer because it's just simple to understand as well. And it's all, and you know, when we did this workshop together, Angela, when was that? When we developed this workshop for nature play 4 years ago, and we did the sensory journey walk 4 years ago. So I think there's so many things we have already in place, but I guess because we're all so busy with other things to really bring it, net it together, and then make I guess nearly a program that we can then roll out together. I think that's really the next phase. That's right, really brought together.
So recently we just did a whole sensory tour around a neighbourhood in Rockhampton, and it was a very high, there's a high lot of trauma with families there, tremendous amount of people that had weren't attending school, and they're really struggling. So they brought the whole community together. But the first thing we did was we spent an hour driving around the neighbourhood, and the first thing we discovered, it was not walkable. So people weren't connecting because it wasn't walkable. But can I tell you, we attempted to do that, and the sensory experience that we experienced walking around that neighbourhood, which was absolutely unwalkable. Our first solution was to make the neighbourhood walkable. People could experience there's little creeks, there's incredible wildlife, there's incredible vegetation. It was all in this neighbourhood. It was absolutely stunningly beautiful, but because you could move around this neighbourhood and experience the quality and the sensory experience of that neighbourhood, people were staying inside their houses, and children, including children. So I think the whole thing can come together. I mean, I'm sure we could go to Glenmore and do a trial project and get Queensland Walks, you guys and us involved, and that local community, and really, you know, do a Tales of the Hood experience in that location, because they're absolutely raring to go. And they've got Connect for Children funding, so they're a Connect for Children service through the Education Queensland. So I'd happily bring that one about, and we could maybe do a big trial of the Tales of the Hood.
Love that. Sounds amazing, Angela. Thanks you.
Yeah, no problem.
So there's no more questions, but I did want to say, Councillor Constant said that he had to excuse himself because he had to rest his throat, but that was a little while ago. So.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, everybody. Like, I think, love that, Jonathan. Actually, we had an amazing time in Mandurah. I can't even say it properly, but that was with John Daly and David Snyder. It was heaps of fun. Yeah, we should relive that. Absolutely. So I would still love, guys, are you up for it? If everybody puts unmute and we sing happy birthday. I think we should do this. Come on, let's
I've
do
got
that.
a toast. I got a toast.
Okay. We got glasses. Oh, they're on the table. Oh, I thought we drink out of the bottle. Guys, thank you so much. I would love, this is like, it's great that we can connect like this, but I would love to actually now celebrate in person with you guys. Once all of this is back to normal, we definitely organize a nice party where we can see each other and engage. Okay, let's sing. 1, 2, 3. Happy
birthday
to you.
Birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Seven Senses. Happy birthday to you.
All right. Right.
Hooray!
All right.
Guys, it wouldn't happen without you, and the next 7 years will be amazing. Cheers.
It will be.